Alabama could face a controversial decision after the latest college football eligibility ruling. Injuries could push Alabama toward a controversial decision that nobody expected, and head coach Kalen DeBoer may have just left the door open. College football is facing one of the most unusual controversies in recent memory, and this time the Alabama Crimson Tide is right in the middle of it. It all started with a court decision in Louisiana involving a temporary restraining order that opened the door for certain players from the 2022 recruiting class to regain an additional season of college eligibility. It sounds almost impossible. NFL players returning to college football? But that is exactly the situation college football is now dealing with, and several major programs are already watching the legal developments very closely, including Alabama. If you follow college football, you already know that a development like this could completely change the balance of power between programs. And before we continue, if you want to stay up to date with everything happening around Alabama Crimson Tide football, make sure you subscribe to the channel and leave your opinion in the comments. It helps the channel grow and allows us to keep bringing you more Alabama content. Now, back to the story, because this situation is getting even more interesting. The biggest trigger was Daquan Wright, a tight end who had been with the Cleveland Browns. Because of the Louisiana court ruling, Wright became part of an unprecedented situation in which players from the 2022 recruiting class could potentially regain another year of college eligibility. And Wright's destination appears to be LSU, where he would reunite with head coach Lane Kiffin, who previously coached him at Ole Miss. Wright has already entered the NCAA transfer portal as part of this extraordinary process, but the ruling does not apply exclusively to LSU. Other programs could potentially benefit from the same legal development. And that is exactly why Kalen DeBoer was asked about the possibility of Alabama bringing former players back to Tuscaloosa. DeBoer's response did not completely close the door. The Alabama coach essentially indicated that there is a possibility, that some things are outside his control, and that he's not going to spend his time worrying about situations he cannot control. In other words, he's going to wait and see how everything develops. It was a very measured response, exactly the kind of answer you would expect from a coach who does not want to reveal his strategy, but also does not want to eliminate an option that could become valuable. And there are some very real names connected to Alabama. The players from Alabama's 2022 recruiting class who could potentially benefit from the ruling include Com Dewberry, Jam Miller, L.T. Overton, Jeremy Bernard, and Domani Jackson, 5 players with recent Alabama connections who could potentially return to Tuscaloosa. But 2 names immediately stand out. The first is Com Dewberry, the offensive guard who played for Alabama in 2025 and entered the 2026 NFL Draft. Dewberry went through Alabama's Pro Day in March and was considered an NFL prospect. He later joined the Atlanta Falcons. However, his situation is precisely the kind that could make this scenario interesting. If his NFL roster situation doesn't work out, returning to Alabama could potentially become an option under the new legal circumstances. And from Alabama's perspective, an experienced offensive lineman could be extremely valuable. The second major name is Jam Miller. Miller was one of Alabama's most experienced running backs and spent his entire college career in Tuscaloosa. He played 51 games for the Crimson Tide, rushing for 1,596 yards and 13 touchdowns, while also contributing 40 receptions for 336 yards and 2 receiving touchdowns. In 2026, Miller was selected by the New England Patriots in the 7th round of the NFL Draft with the 245th overall pick. That makes his situation particularly fascinating. If Miller's NFL opportunity doesn't develop the way he hopes, the possibility of returning to Alabama could theoretically become very interesting, and Alabama certainly understands the value he could bring. The Crimson Tide has already experienced significant changes in the backfield, and adding an experienced player like Miller would provide another proven option. Then there are the other former Alabama players connected to this situation. L.T. Overton, a defensive lineman, was selected by the Dallas Cowboys in the 4th round of the 2026 NFL Draft. Domani Jackson, a defensive back, was selected by the Green Bay Packers in the 6th round, and Jeremy Bernard, the former Alabama wide receiver, also entered the 2026 NFL draft process. That's what makes this situation so fascinating. Alabama could potentially have multiple former players with NFL connections who might become eligible to return to college football. But would Alabama actually do it? And would Alabama become the villain if it did? Honestly, some people around college football would probably criticize the move. But the argument made by LSU head coach Lane Kiffin is very straightforward. Kiffin has publicly defended the decision to recruit players who may regain eligibility. His argument is essentially this: if these players are going to return to college football anyway, the question becomes whether they're going to play for your team or against your team. And from the player's perspective, the decision could also make sense. Imagine a young player who has already reached the NFL but is not guaranteed a roster spot. If the NFL opportunity disappears, returning to college could potentially provide another season of development, another chance to compete at a high level, and potentially another opportunity to earn money through NIL and revenue-sharing arrangements. It could also give the player another opportunity to improve his professional profile before another NFL opportunity comes along. So why would Alabama automatically close the door? That's exactly why DeBoer's carefully worded response is so interesting. He didn't announce that Alabama was bringing anyone back. He didn't confirm negotiations with Dewberry or Miller, but he also didn't completely dismiss the possibility. And that leaves Alabama with room to maneuver while the legal situation continues to develop. The 5 former Alabama players most closely associated with this potential scenario are Cam Dewberry, offensive guard; Jam Miller, running back; L.T. Overton, defensive lineman; Jeremy Bernard, wide receiver; and Domani Jackson, defensive back. All 5 were members of Alabama's 2022 recruiting class, and all went through the 2026 NFL draft process. Alabama's official Pro Day list confirms Dewberry, Miller, Bernard, Overton, and Jackson were among the draft-eligible former Alabama players showcased in March. But the 2 names to watch most closely are Cam Dewberry and Jam Miller. Dewberry could potentially address a need along the offensive line. Miller could potentially provide experience and depth in the running back room, and that's where this becomes much more than a legal curiosity. If Alabama suddenly has the ability to bring back proven former players at positions of need, the Alabama Crimson Tide would have to at least consider the possibility. Of course, there are still major questions. The legal ruling is part of a long-standing legal battle involving NCAA eligibility rules, and the exact long-term consequences remain uncertain. The NCAA has already expressed concerns about the broader impact of these rulings on college sports. So this is not a simple situation where Alabama can simply call a former player and put him back on the roster. Eligibility, legal status, roster limitations, player contracts, and other factors would all have to be considered. For now, Kalen DeBoer is keeping his options open. He hasn't confirmed that Alabama will pursue any former player, but he has also given no indication that the Crimson Tide intends to completely ignore this unprecedented opportunity. And that's why Alabama fans should be watching this situation very closely, because if the legal landscape continues moving in this direction, the Crimson Tide could suddenly find itself with the opportunity to bring back players who were wearing Alabama uniforms just months ago. Cam Dewberry, Jam Miller, L.T. Overton, Jeremy Bernard, and Domani Jackson. 5 former Alabama players. 5 names connected to an extraordinary new chapter in college football, and nobody knows exactly where this story is going. But one thing is certain: Kalen DeBoer is keeping the door open. Now, I want to hear from you. Do you think Alabama should bring back former players like Cam Dewberry or Jam Miller to Tuscaloosa if the opportunity becomes available, even if it creates a storm of criticism across college football? Let me know what you think in the comments, because this discussion is only beginning.